Early Saturday morning, explosions ripped through Venezuela's capital of Caracas as a group of American Special Operations helicopters descended into the city. These rotorcraft carried members of the Army's secretive Delta Force, arguably the most elite special operations unit in the world, accompanied by law enforcement agents tasked with bringing Venezuela's illegitimate leader, Nicolas Maduro, into custody. Now, this incredibly complex and precise mission saw the involvement of more than 150 aircraft, at least a half dozen U.S. Navy ships, and active coordination across the Joint Special Operations Command, the Air Force, the Space Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, all supported by intelligence gathered by a multitude of assets and agencies, including a covert CIA team that was operating inside Venezuela since last August. Now, Venezuela may not boast a globe-leading military, but let there be no doubt. What the United States military did this weekend was arguably the most daring and incredible military operation we have seen carried out in the modern era, with American forces laying waste to Russian-sourced air defenses, neutering the response of Russian-sourced fighter jets, putting down literally dozens of Venezuelan and Cuban troops in direct firefights, and capturing a nation's leader and his wife inside a stronghold meant to prevent exactly that sort of operation, all before flying home without suffering even a single American loss. And while the legal framework for Maduro's capture and the Trump administration's plans for the future of Venezuela are both subject to plenty of continued controversy and debate, there is no denying that Saturday's operation was a stark and maybe even a terrifying demonstration of American military prowess, developed over decades of ongoing combat operations all over the world, and the most technologically advanced force structure in the history of this planet. Or to put that into simpler and even more dramatic terms, this week, governments all over the world are being forced to reckon with the fact that America's military really is the boogeyman. So let's break down Operation Absolute Resolve, the spies that made it possible, the aircraft that led the fight, and the operators on the ground, including some added insights we got from a few of our friends, including former Delta operators and CIA officers, all with experience in these sorts of operations. I'm Alex Hollings. Welcome to Firepower. If you're anything like me, you probably get pretty tired of YouTubers and other content creators acting like every story is unprecedented and historic, playing up the gravity and the implications and the potential outcomes of every new development to drive engagement, clicks, and comments, and that really makes covering a story like this, the capture of Venezuela's illegitimate leader and autocratic dictator Nicolas Maduro, a real challenge. Because, well, to be completely honest with you, this story genuinely is both unprecedented and historic, for more reasons than one. Discourse surrounding this operation is ripe with realistic and genuine concerns about the precedent that this action sets on the world stage, with some fearing America's unilateral actions in Venezuela could embolden nations like China with their imperial aims for Taiwan, while weakening the foundation of the rules-based international order that serves as the very basis for condemning things like the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Critics of Maduro's capture are, by and large, less concerned with Maduro and more concerned with how America's use of military force against Venezuela or any nation carried out without international or even congressional support could legitimize similar offensives from other nations, taking military actions against foreign governments for strategic gains, rather than as a response to the direct threat of aggression. Now, this debate spans several very different areas of expertise, including American law, international law, the UN Charter, and much more nebulous topics like public perception, both at home and abroad. And it is sure to continue for some time to come. So for now, rather than focusing on trying to build one geopolitical puzzle out of pieces from each of those different boxes, let's keep our focus squarely on the operation itself. Because a lot like watching Banksy paint graffiti on a bridge in Bristol, you don't have to universally condone an act to recognize the artistry involved. And in the scope of military operations on the world stage, I would contend that artistry is an appropriate word for the execution of Operation Absolute Resolve. But the story of this mission doesn't start with helicopters lifting off the Iwo Jima on Friday night. Some might argue that it stretches back to 2018, with the first of two elections that international observers say Maduro rightfully lost, but that saw the authoritarian retain power anyway through a combination of fraud and political violence. But from a more practical standpoint, I would contend that this mission really began in earnest last August, when a covert team of CIA field officers were smuggled into Caracas and began compiling information about Maduro and his inner circle. Now this, of course, was also right around when the US also began building up forces in the region, and that is not a coincidence. Now, covert espionage on foreign soil is often carried out by CIA officers who are attached to the US State Department, so they can work out of American embassies. And this gives them secure working facilities and diplomatic cover as they develop their assets. But for the covert team in Caracas, that was not an option. The State Department had shuttered its facilities in Venezuela back in 2019, following Maduro's first stolen election. And to get a sense of just how difficult this operation might have been, I spoke to a former CIA officer who asked to be identified only as Jason. And I'll quote him now. The thing that people need to understand is that this isn't Hollywood. Even though the media is reporting that the agency personnel were part of a team, those individuals likely had different roles, support, tech, case or operations officers, etc., and may have been physically separated while carrying out their portion of the op. Add to that the fact that while they likely had other external support like drones, they did not have the on-the-ground support of an embassy, like operating in other countries might. They are out in the environment, doing what they were trained to do, from conducting surveillance to meeting with assets in the area to collect and disseminate intelligence. All of these factors heighten the tension in an already stressful situation and leaves even less room for error. Now, according to the New York Times, these operatives did indeed have overhead support in the form of stealth ISR, or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance drones, operating high in Venezuelan airspace. Based on images of Lockheed Martin's RQ-170 stealth drone seemingly returning after Saturday morning's operation, well, it seems pretty likely that they were among the drones employed. They also reportedly had a source on the inside of Maduro's inner circle, which, combined with those drones, allowed the team to map out Maduro and his security detachment's daily routines, including exactly where he would be at different times of the day and night. Now, Maduro was clearly concerned about security. The CIA team observed as he rotated between at least a half dozen secure residences, never knowing for sure which one he'd stay in each night until he arrived there in the evenings. Now, the intel collected by that CIA team was leveraged by several different organizations, including America's Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC, which used the details that they gathered to construct an exact replica of Maduro's primary compound in the presidential palace. They built this replica compound in the woods of Kentucky for members of one of the most elite special operations units in history, commonly known as Delta, to rehearse their extraction. Now, according to reports, these rehearsals also included, among many other things, using various cutting tools and explosives to rip through reinforced steel doors at consistently faster rates, under the assumption that Maduro would likely reach his safe room during the operation. And now I'll quote a recently retired Delta operator who is still affiliated with the unit, who spoke to us on Monday under the condition of anonymity. Now he said, and I quote, "Normally, an operation like this would require months and weeks of preparation with multiple plan Bs ready in case something went wrong." Now, the first Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, also known as Delta Force or the Combat Applications Group, among a bunch of other potential names, is arguably the most secretive and highly trained warfighting unit ever to see the fight. Delta was founded as an elite counterterrorism and hostage rescue unit back in 1977, and today it serves alongside SEAL Team 6 and the 24th Special Tactics Squadron at the very pinnacle of America's Special Operations pyramid. Now, unlike SEAL Team 6, which recruits solely from other SEAL teams, Delta plucks the best warfighters from across all operational specialties and even military branches, though the majority of Delta's elite operators do tend to hail from other Spec Ops units within the Army, primarily Green Berets and Army Rangers. And even with such a highly trained collection of soldiers to choose from, few of them still manage to make it through Delta selection. As our own staff Delta Force operator George Hand recounted in a piece that he wrote for Sandboxx News, the first 4 weeks of specialized training and assessment held at Camp Dawson in West Virginia saw his 200-soldier Delta class dwindle down to just 21 men who, quote, qualified to begin the very basics of training for the Delta Force. Now, I don't mean to belabor this point, but I just really want to highlight the fact that when American adversaries have trouble sleeping at night, well, it's usually Delta that they're worried about. And this past weekend, Delta showed the whole world why. According to reports, President Trump authorized this raid as early as Christmas Day, but left the precise planning of the mission to Pentagon officials. From Thursday the 25th to the following Friday, January 2nd, the massing U.S. forces around Venezuela waited for the variables to line up that would allow them to strike. In particular, they needed Maduro to stay at that primary compound that Delta had trained for. They needed good weather to operate in, and they needed a time of day or night that they knew would minimize the chances of civilian casualties. Now, initial plans called for launching this raid amid the holidays, while many Venezuelan service members were on leave, but bad weather kept pushing the mission back. And at around 4:30 p.m. on Friday, the pieces were beginning to finally fall into place. The weather was dissipating, and U.S. forces confirmed Maduro was at his primary compound. Now, this prompted the deployment of more as yet undisclosed intelligence-gathering assets. Now, these all but certainly had to be stealth ISR drones like the aforementioned RQ-170 or even the larger and even more secretive Northrop Grumman RQ-180, because platforms like the MQ-9 Reaper operating anywhere other than off the coast would all but certainly have been engaged by Venezuelan air defenses, or at the very least, tip them off that something was going on. Now, at approximately 10:46 p.m. Friday night, with the situation unchanged in Caracas, President Trump gave the final authorization for the mission. And at that moment, troops from literally every branch of the American armed forces sprang into action, starting with a cyber attack on Caracas's energy grid that blanketed whole swaths of the city in darkness as more than 150 aircraft, including Air Force F-35As, Marine Corps F-35Bs, F-22 Raptors, FA-18 Super Hornets, EA-18G Growlers, E-2 Hawkeye early warning aircraft, and B-1B Lancer bombers all approached the Venezuelan coast from 20 different military bases and U.S. Navy vessels. I'll quote General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff now. Quote, "The word integration does not explain the sheer complexity of such a mission. An extraction so precise it involved more than 150 aircraft launching across the Western Hemisphere in close coordination, all coming together in time and place to layer effects for a single purpose: to get an interdiction force into downtown Caracas while maintaining the element of tactical surprise. Failure of one component of this well-oiled machine would have endangered the entire mission." Now, one of the first tasks was, of course, the suppression and destruction of enemy air defenses, which is easily among the most complex and dangerous fighter missions a pilot can take on. In effect, the job is to fly into enemy airspace, waiting for enemy air defense radars to power up and try to shoot you down. The pilot then launches anti-radiation or radar hunting missiles in an attempt to destroy that air defense array before it can guide a missile into that launching fighter. It's the closest thing to being a Wild West gunfighter you are apt to find in modern warfare. Now, Venezuela operates Russian-sourced air defense systems, including what may be 2 or even more modernized S-300s, technically S-300 VMs or export models, along with at least 44 older but heavily upgraded S-125 short-range surface-to-air missile systems, which are the same platform used to bring down an American F-117 Nighthawk back in 1999. They also have at least 9 more highly mobile and more modern Buke M2E Grizzly medium-range missile systems that have really proven pretty effective against Ukrainian fighters in Europe. And while Russian air defense capabilities are pretty much always exaggerated, this combination of older and more modern Russian equipment really should be able to create a pretty effective, even if piecemeal, integrated air defense net capable of identifying, tracking, and bringing down targets ranging from sea-skimming cruise missiles to fighters and bombers, and even some ballistic missiles, thanks to upgrades to those S-300s. Now, another immediate task for American forces was striking El Libertador Air Base in Maracay, about 60 miles from Caracas, both to stymie Venezuelan command and control and to prevent any of the nation's 31 or so Su-30 fighters from getting airborne, to give the nearby Raptors something to write home about. Now, Venezuela took delivery on these fighters from Russia in 2006, and broadly speaking, they represent the most modern and capable fighters in all of Latin America. These Su-30 Mk2 flankers boast 12 hardpoints and can be armed with, among other weapons, R-77 radar-guided air-to-air missiles that have a maximum range of around 50 miles, not to mention several different shorter-ranged air-to-air options. Venezuela also has a handful of operational F-16s left over, but they really represent little more than a token capability at this point and would be unlikely to cause much of a fuss. It was right around 1:30 a.m. local time, or 2:30 a.m. in Washington, when the first explosions were reported in Venezuela, as air defense radar arrays went up in flames around Caracas, destroyed by 150-pound high-explosive blast fragmentation warheads carried by radar-hunting missiles like the AGM-88 HARM, launched from fighters ripping through the sky overhead. And thousands of feet below, soaring through the inky darkness just 100 feet above the waves, MH-47 Chinooks and MH-60 Blackhawks from the Army's legendary 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, more commonly known as the Night Stalkers, departed the USS Iwo Jima and made their way to Maduro's compound. Now, these helicopters carried the Delta operators who had trained extensively on that replica of Maduro's compound, as well as members of the FBI's elite HRT, or Hostage Rescue Team, which trains extensively for direct action counter-terror and, obviously, hostage rescue missions. Combined, this ground force was said to be made up of some 200 special operators and agents, including at least one FBI hostage negotiator, just in case Maduro managed to secure himself inside a safe room that the operators couldn't get open. Now, despite the suppression of air defense operations going on overhead, these helicopters were still in very real danger. Aside from those radar-guided surface-to-air missile systems that we already discussed, Venezuela also boasts at least 440 Russian-sourced twin-barreled 23mm anti-aircraft guns capable of just tearing a Chinook or Blackhawk to shreds. And just as seriously, the nation also has hundreds, if not thousands, of SA-24 Grinch man-pads, or shoulder-fired infrared-guided missile systems that also would make pretty easy work of most low-flying helicopters. Risks be damned, the helicopters were closing on Maduro's compound by 2 a.m. As they arrived, one of the helicopters took fire and was hit, though it isn't clear by what. We do know, however, that the helicopter was able to return fire and eliminate that threat, and then go on to continue the mission, meaning it couldn't have been that badly damaged. The Delta and HRT operators disembarked the helicopter and used explosives to breach the compound doors, where they were immediately engaged by Maduro's security detachment as he and his wife attempted to flee to a more secure safe room. rather than remaining there, which could have resulted in the helicopters being engaged by local forces. The rotorcraft immediately departed. Now, it is worth noting that it's pretty widely believed that Venezuela's 63,000 regular army troops and 23,000 National Guard troops and 15,000 active duty Marines and thousands more militia members have all probably received pretty lackluster training in recent years because Venezuela has been much more focused on its own internal turmoil than anything else. But quantity really does have a quality all its own, especially when we're talking tens of thousands versus a few hundred. So moving quickly was of the utmost importance. According to U.S. officials, Delta was able to breach the building, eliminate all of Maduro's security, and reach their target in under 3 minutes. When the dust settled, an unknown number of Venezuelan soldiers had been killed, as well as another 32 Cuban soldiers that were said to be a part of Maduro's security detail. Now, I'm going to quote our friend, that unnamed former Delta operator now, quote, "No other organization besides the unit," meaning Delta, "could have pulled this off. We're talking about surgical precision combined with speed and violence of action in the heart of an enemy state. Maduro tried to flee to a safe room, but the guys were so fast he didn't have the time. That's not easily done in a palace full of hostiles." Within 5 minutes of Delta's boots hitting the ground, they radioed in that they had secured Maduro and his wife and were awaiting extraction. But the fighting wasn't over. According to General Kane, multiple, quote, self-defense engagements continued as the team loaded their prisoners onto the helicopter and departed. And by 3:29 a.m. in Caracas, the team and their new prisoners were already over the water, making their way back to the USS Iwo Jima. In the span of just a few hours, the United States military combined cyber, air, and surface attacks to enter the capital of a foreign nation more than 1,000 miles from its own shores, capture that nation's sitting, though unrecognized president, and depart without suffering a single American loss. The operation saw the seamless, real-time coordination of U.S. SOCOM, the Air Force, the Space Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. In the scope of geopolitics and even the history of modern warfare, few single operations have ever so thoroughly demonstrated such a complete tactical, strategic, technological, and capability overmatch between forces. And that's something that other governments, adversary and otherwise, are sure to stop and take note of. And if I were in their shoes, I can admit that I would be losing a bit of sleep over this. After all, if the United States can just waltz into a nation like Venezuela, which does boast some of the more advanced air defense capabilities in service today, and just throw a bag over its dictator's head and drag him off to New York, it stands to reason that Uncle Sam could feasibly do the same to, well, most nations. And while that was true prior to this weekend's operation, what's arguably a new development is America's apparent willingness to do so. After 4 years of watching Russia struggle to capture Ukrainian territory inch by inch, a nation on its own border, and with a capital less than 200 miles from Russia, America's capture of Maduro at the expense of Russian-sourced air defenses serves as a pretty potent counterpoint to growing concerns about waning American military might. The U.S. military is, indeed, facing a long list of big challenges, many of which are budget-related. But as I've said on this channel lots of times before, you just can't judge the American military using the same rubric as you would for other nations. Ongoing concerns about American military readiness are absolutely serious, but most don't recognize that those concerns are predicated on trying to maintain the ability to fight wars against both Russia and China in separate theaters at the same time. Uncle Sam may struggle to build ships on time or to develop fighters within budget, but in terms of sheer volume of force and level of technological capability, America's military remains a downright terrifying overmatch for any and every nation on this planet. Now, that's not blind patriotism or nationalistic bias or even an optimistic assertion. That is an objective fact. Whenever anything bad happens anywhere within America's sprawling defense apparatus, I always get tons of commenters saying, "So this is what we get for our trillion-dollar defense budgets, huh?" And I get it. It's hard to see just how capable America's military is through the lens of sensational media coverage and a lot of bad takes online. But every so often, the US military's taken off the leash and given a green light to do what it actually does best. Take a seemingly impossible task and just mercilessly pound it into the ground through overwhelming force and advanced technology. And this operation serves as a real reminder of just what those big defense budgets actually do buy. You can believe the capture of Maduro was justified or not. You can believe that it was legal or that it wasn't. You can believe that it'll be good for Venezuelans or that it won't be. And I'll be totally honest with you, I'm not even entirely sure where I stand on some of those questions. But one thing none of us can deny today is that Operation Absolute Resolve demonstrated to the world that the US military is always ready to fight dirty, to make mission, and to continue to be that big stick carried by softly speaking officials and diplomats in the years ahead. And that's one thing in the midst of all of this that I can say for sure is good news. And with that ends yet another edition of Firepower from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.